Hollywood, playing various character parts, being a character actor that I always wanted to be. And then, of course, because I did all these fun characters and stand-up comedy and all that stuff, I was invited to audition for a show called Tales from the Crypt. And I had collected the comic books as a kid, so I was like, okay, this could be really cool. It was HBO, who I had already worked for. So I knew that they could make it edgy and fun. And the producers were Joel Silver and Richard Donner and Bob Zemeckis and David Giler, who did Alien, and Walter Hill, who had directed 48 Hours and all these other great movies. And I'm like, these guys are heavyweights, I'm sure they're going to get all kinds of great people involved. So, of course, I just thought it was going to be a cult classic for freaks like me, but it turned out to be obviously something big. So I was invited to audition, and just a handful of people were people like Michael Winslow, who, does all the sound effects from all the Police Academy movies, and Charlie Flesher, the voice of Roger Rabbit, and people like that were all invited to come down and audition in Kevin Yeager's studio. And if you're not familiar with Kevin Yeager, Kevin's a creature maker for many years and a director who created the look for Chucky and did all the animatronics for Chucky and created the look for Freddy Krueger and all these different, just obviously somebody who's very talented. Did the whole look for Sleepy Hollow. In fact, he had originally gotten the rights to Sleepy Hollow and was going to direct it himself, but of course when Tim Burton wanted to be involved, he stepped aside and let him do it. But Kevin's a great director. Directed all the wraparound sequences to Tales from the Crypt. All the opening and closings with the Crypt Keeper were directed by Kevin. The episodes would be directed by whatever guest director was that week, but he directed all the stuff with the Crypt Keeper. And I went down to his studio, and he was creating the puppet at that time, and auditioned for it there. He had just a little sound studio set up, and I auditioned for him, and I noticed this character with rotting teeth and sunken skin and these bright eyes and all these, the copy that they had were really stupid puns like, be careful what you ask for, you may get it, And so I read those and improvised a lot of my own stuff like, would you like to try my lady fingers? They're delicious, although my lady was not so quick to part with them. Stuff like that. They were like, that's it. And the next day I was doing it in an office for Richard Donner and Joel Silver. And the rest is history. The very first season, normally when they start a new show, they don't have the budget when a show that showed some success. So they didn't have the budget. If you watch the first season wraparounds to Tales from the Crypt, the Crypt Keeper talks much slower and more ominous because puppet couldn't work that quickly. They didn't have the money to put all the different servos in it to make him speak. They were like, you're gonna have to slow it down. Puppeteers can't move that fast, and the puppet's the automated mouth doesn't work that quickly. So, once the show got picked up and was a big hit, they put more money into it, and they could, he would move faster, so we could go back to the funny delivery that I had originally auditioned with, more of a stand-up comedian kind of delivery. And now I'm going to open it up to questions, since you now have a history of my history and how I wound up doing Tales from the Crypt. Obviously it has a long history in terms of the actual show and the comic books and that kind of thing. If you have any questions about that, I have a limited knowledge of that, the history of Tales from the Crypt before the show, but any questions? Yes, sir.
Were you ever in an episode of the Tales from the Crypt?
Yes, I did an episode. Actually, they had asked me over the years to do a number of episodes, but I never, doing these other shows that I was doing and stuff at the same time I was doing Tales from the Crypt, never worked out with my schedule. And I wound up doing an episode which was supposed to be the very last episode of the show, called Oil's Well That Ends Well. And it was with Lou Diamond Phillips and Priscilla Presley and a great old character actor by the name of Rory Calhoun, who used to be a cowboy star on television. And Alan Ruck, who you know from Ferris Bueller's Day Off and Spin City, you know Alan. And Noble Willingham, who was played the colonel and general in Good Morning Vietnam. Great group of actors. And I played this folk glam artist. They had to bury me in a coffin, which was really kind of scary. It's like they put you in the coffin, I'm going to pop up out of it at some point, and you're in the grave, and all of a sudden they're like, okay, we got to put some dirt on it, and you're just listening to the dirt going, and you're just like, get me out of here. I'm like, are you rolling camera? Are you rolling camera? And then I'd have to pop out, and it was like, somebody was like, well, how did you act that, that distressed thing when you opened the thing? I was like, I didn't have to act it. I was feeling it, It's a creepy feeling to get in a coffin, period, but to have them throw dirt on top of it is kind of a weird thing. But Lou Diamond Phillips was standing there. He goes, look, dude, just rap on it if you want to get out. And I'm like, I'll get you out, But we got through that shot. It was a lot of fun. Then I had to do a stunt back into the, where they shoot me and I go flying back into the grave, which was kind of fun, into a crash pad. But that was a lot of fun to shoot. Oil's Well That Ends Well. And but then they wound up picking like I said, it was supposed to be the last episode. They wound up picking up the show for another season that they shot in London, which was season 7. So, and maybe I'll find some addresses to have you guys send your cards and letters begging for more episodes. it would be cool. I'd like to see them do more episodes. I mean, not even for just the work, but just because I love the show. With all these new directors and actors out there and stuff, it would be another fun playground to see that kind of thing. One of my favorites, and one that always stands out to me, is The Man Who Was Deaf, which is William Sattler plays an executioner at the prison, and Walter Hill directed it, and it had a real style to it because he talks to the camera, even though there are people around him, he breaks out of the mode and talks to the camera about how, it's an ugly job, but somebody's got to do it, and he looks into the eyes of the person before he fries them, and all this, really deep stuff, and Ry Cooder did the music for it, so it has this really cool kind of, kind of feel to it, and they wind up abolishing the death penalty in his state, so he goes about as a vigilante, finding bad guys and frying them in their hot tubs and stuff like that. And of course he gets caught just about the time that they reinstate the death penalty, and he gets fried in the end himself. And of course in the end the Crypt Keeper is sitting in an electric chair frying himself and getting off on it. So that's one of my favorites. Yeah. Some of those have a lot more dramatic effect to them than some of the Tales from the Crypt episodes. Obviously, they're all based on stories from Tales from the Crypt, from Two-Fisted Tales, Tales from the Vault. They were all EC Comics that they licensed, that the partners, I call them, all those producers that I mentioned, licensed from William Gaines. Back in the late 50s, early 60s, when Tales from the Crypt comic books were doing really well, people's, mothers spoke out about them, saying that they were, contributed to juvenile delinquency and stuff like that. There was a lot of press, of course, it just helped sell comic books. And during the time when EC Comics came out with Mad Magazine, they didn't really want the bad press anymore, so there wasn't, I think there was like maybe 550 stories that they could draw from, and a lot of them similar to others, so they tried to pick episodes that had the best content to them, and obviously somebody had to take some small comic book story and write some great script. And depending on who directed them and who acted in them and who wrote them, they could be anywhere from feeling like a cartoon to an actual comic book story to something like that more dramatic kind of thing.